Hello, Writing 101 students. I've really enjoyed the last week of conferencing with all of you, and I look forward to discussing your drafts with you next week and continuing our conferences this week. So this video is going to delve a little deeper into rhetorical analysis for you. I've read your discussions for the second discussion on rhetorical analysis, and I can see many of you are doing a great job understanding and communicating that understanding, and a few of you are showing a little bit of difficulty. Where I see the most difficulty is actually in the examples that you're providing. And so I'm going to take a little time to delve a little deeper and explain a couple of things. So first, let's talk about analysis. This is the process of breaking down into parts in order to understand the whole. And it requires the analyzer, you, to use close reading strategies, right? So using prior knowledge, highlighting a text, writing notes, looking at how the whole piece is constructed, all of those kinds of things that we do when we are doing close reading, which basically means you're not just passively reading the text and hoping that you're going to just understand it, but actually taking the time to actively read the text and make notes and think about what you're reading and how it's put together. So an act of analysis is actually useful to distinguish in a couple of ways because analysis can be applied in many different situations, right? So for example, we have literary analysis and we have situational analysis, and then we have what we're doing in this class, which is rhetorical analysis. So literary analysis is the process of breaking down the parts of a piece of literature, right? So this might be a short story, a novel, a poem. And when we're doing that, we need to think about the tools that writers use when they're writing literature, right? And those will vary from genre to genre, but often will be things like character and plot and symbol and those kinds of things, right? And then situational analysis happens in our everyday lives, in our situations with interacting with people, right? So some people gave examples of situational analysis actually. Running into somebody, reading their body language, reading what they're saying, and reacting and understanding what they're communicating or what they're about is situational analysis. Rhetorical analysis, however, is something different. So we first have to take this word rhetorical, right? Which in its root is the word rhetoric, which is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, right? And so, yes, it is important to keep in mind that we can see just about all writing and speaking as persuasive, right? This idea that everything is an argument. However, when we apply the term rhetorical analysis, we're really using that to define the kind of analysis we apply to texts that are categorized as arguments, right? So a couple of examples. A speech is almost always an argument. An argumentative essay is an argument. Scholarly arguments, right, are arguments. Nonfiction narratives oftentimes are arguments. Usually when we're talking about arguments, we're not talking about fiction. Even though, yes, of course, we can always apply rhetoric and rhetorical analysis to these things as well. That's just not the writer's intent based on the form in which they're writing, right? So when you get to the pieces that you're writing about for CD3, right, which actually you already have gotten to it, right? Your posts were due last night. You are looking at arguments, pieces that are explicitly arguments. Now, some of them will be direct and some of them will be indirect. And oftentimes it's the nonfiction narratives that are indirect, as in the thesis, the argument, what the writer wants you to believe may or may not be directly stated. If it's directly stated, it's a direct argument. If it's not, and it's implied through everything the writer says, that's an implied argument, right? So the other component that's critical to think about here is that we can analyze other people's arguments, which is what you're doing in the first essay, as well as our own, right? And we can use our ability to do rhetorical analysis not only to analyze what we've written, but to construct an argument with intent. And this becomes a really useful set of tools for writers. So another critical part of rhetorical analysis that distinguishes it from close reading strategies is that you are actually evaluating the text as well as understanding it, right? Of course, you first have to understand it in order to evaluate it. So you need to use your close reading skills to understand what the writer's saying and to see how they put the argument together. But the other part of that is to evaluate its effectiveness, right? So rhetorical analysis is more than understanding a text, it is evaluating a text. Rhetorical analysis helps us to evaluate the effectiveness of an argument. So here are some of the questions that you'll be asking and answering in your essays that move you from simply understanding to evaluating. Is the argument effective? So were you persuaded? Is this the right time to make this argument? And that gets at kairos, right? We can make arguments sometimes at the wrong time, and therefore, even if they're well written, they're not effective because people aren't ready to hear them, people aren't ready to act, those sorts of things. So an example would be with social justice work and the killing of George Floyd, the kairos, right? It's the right time. It's to make arguments for eradicating racism, amping up efforts to repair the damage that's already been done in this society because it's the opportune moment, right? So that's what you want to think about with kairos. Then think about your own component here. Yes, many of you talked about how it's an objective process. It helps you kind of step back and break it down and depersonalize it, and that is true. However, I would argue we're never able to do that fully. We are always present and making meaning in the text and applying prior knowledge, applying our own beliefs to texts. And so there can be an argument that's written very well. It uses all the rhetorical techniques well, but still doesn't persuade you for a variety of reasons, right? And so I want you thinking about that. Do you believe this argument? And why or why not, right? And then think about audience as well. Might others believe it? Why might others believe it, right? So with this one, you may not be the intended audience. Maybe this is written for somebody else. And so you can remove yourself and go, well, okay, this isn't very persuasive for me. I can see how it would be persuasive for other people who this piece was written for, right? So be thinking about that and be thinking about the ways in which our own lived experience and personalities and belief systems impact a writer's ability to persuade us. So I want to take a couple minutes to highlight some of the student work in our class. So I have the two sections, right? So Kendra, Days, Chelsea in 11843, take a look at their posts, especially their examples. Kendra gives a great example of making an argument about about persuading her partner to get a puppy, right? And so she is talking about using rhetoric to make an argument. And then Dace does a really great job giving the example of analyzing an argument in relation to politics, right? And politics is a perfect place to apply rhetorical strategies. Go back, look at some of the convention speeches from both the Democratic and Republican conventions. Those are all excellent pieces to rhetorically analyze. Politics is definitely a critical place to apply these skills. Then Chelsea did a great job of giving us an example of analyzing the argument in a movie. And what I like about this one, there were a couple examples about movies in the classes. And what she does is she really does take another form that we might not typically think as an argument, right? But can look at how it all comes together to actually reveal an argument. And she can apply rhetorical strategies to a piece of literary work or entertainment, right? Because, of course, the movie she uses is a novel, was originally a novel, to show how it's constructed in order to make a point, to send a message, which we can see as an argument. So, nice job kind of taking those skills and applying them outside of just your straightforward, typical argument category. And then in section 11842, Vic, Christian, Sophia, all great pieces to go back and take a look at if you didn't already read theirs. Vic does a great job with an example of making an argument at work and working to persuade people to initiate mental health components. And so take a look at how she explains that. And then Christian does a nice job with a great example of analyzing an argument at work. And really, I like what he does with the concept of the ways in which we can take things personally as opposed to objective analysis, right? Whereas, yes, there is always that component that we bring to it, but sometimes we are trying to guess and read into things, and this rhetorical analysis process helps take out some of the guessing and really look at, okay, what was said and what can I determine in terms of the argument and the meaning based on what's on the page. That's your concrete evidence, right? So really interesting example from Christian. And then Sophia's example is really great because she actually is talking about ethos. And so if you're struggling at all with ethos, take a look at hers. She's talking about researching and evaluating speakers, authors, in order to test the trustworthiness of what it is they have to say. And that is really looking into the ethos of an author. Who is this person? Why are they making this argument? Should I trust them? Should I trust the information they're providing based on what you can find out about who that person is, right? And then other than that, ethos can also be found in the text based on the way the writer writes, because we always have an authorial presence in our work, right? So look at that. What's the authorial presence in the words? You don't even have to do the research on the author to kind of get a sense for who does this author want me to see them as, right? Or that's kind of a poorly phrased, but who do they want me to imagine them to be, right? How do they treat their reader? What are their word choices? In what ways do they convey their knowledge and experience in the text itself? All right, well, that's it. Have a great week, everybody, and I look forward to more conversations with all of you.